Charlie Sykes. Welcome to this episode of To the Contrary podcast. It is the 100th day of the Trump administration. We got to 100 days. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But I am joined by my fellow Substack writer, Ryan Lizza, who recently left his job at Politico, where he served as the chief Washington correspondent since 2019. And things have been interesting. First of all, welcome to the podcast, Ryan.
Hey, thanks for having me. Long time listener, first time caller, I guess is what you're supposed to say.
Excellent. Okay, so I want to start with Ryan Lizza versus Politico, because I am genuinely fascinated by this entire story. You wrote a piece that was, I think, kind of a mild media criticism of them, but talking about the difficulty of covering the Trump administration, the challenge that we all face, and how some outlets like Politico are perhaps not up to it. Okay, we're going to get back to that. They responded by demanding that you censor your article, that you pull down the entire 1,800-word piece, which was remarkable to see a media outlet basically telling a reporter to shut up. So talk to me about this, because this has been escalating, it feels, day by day by day.
Yeah. I mean, and frankly, I didn't want the first week of TELUS News, that's TELOS.news, to be, overwhelmed with this story. So the opening piece, it prevented me from covering a lot of other stuff I had planned to cover.
Yeah, right.
So you're right. I wrote something 1,800 words a week ago today. The initial post at TELUS News, and it was mostly about Trump targeting Paul Weiss. It was mostly about how these lawyers and the law firm on their website erased their own history under pressure from the Trump administration. So a sort of side story to the big Trump attack on these law firms is just you go look at their websites and see how they have just sort of in this Orwellian fashion cleaned up their own biographies. Their own biographies, their own history, their own celebration of certain parts of their history, and that's what a lot of the piece was about. And then, of course, much of the piece was about announcing what this new media company is that I started, laying out, what I think the problems are in political journalism, and how, in a small way, I hope TELUS can, serve as a model to do things a little bit better. In that 1,800-word article, Politico was mentioned, incidentally, a couple of times. In my view, in a respectful way, but certainly there was some respectful criticism of them, and not the reporters there who are very close friends of mine, who I think are doing very often excellent work, but the leadership. And I was just shocked that after that piece went up, I got these panicked phone calls from a lawyer at Politico, and they left a garbled message. But what I was able to make out is that it had, first of all, the word violation. And I thought, nobody wants to hear, someone saying, "Oh, you violated something," and then you need to take it down immediately. And I thought, take what down? What is this about? And then 20 minutes later, I got a letter saying that that Politico is demanding that I erase from the internet the entire article. So
because they thought it was disparaging to them, right? And that they're saying that you have a non-disparagement deal of some kind. So they're interpreting disparagement as any criticism, including larger criticism of the media in the age of Trump.
Well, that's what I thought. That's what blew me away. The more I thought about it, is this was not. And look, frankly, someone I know at Politico and have worked with in the past. So this was not that person reaching out in a sort of friendly manner, saying, "Hey, we think that this line, let's go through this carefully. We think that these things are." Whatever their case was. I don't think they have a case even on that, but that would have been a conversation to have. They didn't do that. Instead, they just simply demanded, in this intimidating, bullying language, that the entire article be taken down, which frankly put them in the position of, going to bat for the Trump administration, saying, we want, there's no carve outs here. You're reporting on Paul Weiss and the introduction of your new publication. Obviously we have no beef with that. But that's not what they did. They asked for everything to come
No.
down.
Well, and this has continued to escalate. The threats seem to be more pointed. I guess one of my questions is, why are they doing this? Because this does seem to be a perfect example of the Streisand effect. You write this piece, they could have just simply ignored it. Said, hey, Ryan, you go on your way, we'll go on our way. Now this has become a big controversy. Why are they, the corporate overlords of Politico, so anxious to do this, which again calls way more attention now to, you are a media outlet in an age in which the media is under threat, and yet
Yeah.
you're spending a tremendous amount of your time and your social capital trying to kill a story. I mean, I
Yeah.
want to stick with
Yeah.
the hypocrisy there, because, for a lot of people in the media, I think one of the things we've learned is that, despite all of their claims that they are the champions of democracy, bottom line is they're businesses, and they're going to behave like businesses, and they don't care necessarily about, having this kind of free flowing dialogue and reporting.
Well, you really hit it in terms of what we're witnessing in the Trump administration with the
Right.
media, right? I've never been one of those people who was like, media is owned by big corporations, so that therefore none of us can do our job
Yeah.
without interference. But what has changed in the last 100 days is that Trump has used the state,
Yes.
and the enormous regulatory powers of the state, to go one by one, to these behemoth companies who have very important business before the government, and use that as pressure to get the people at the top to reach their hand into the newsrooms and meddle. And that's, as you know, Charlie, that's new. That's new. You could probably point to cases like that in history, but this is systematic. And it started with ABC News,
Right.
and then paying $15 million for this frivolous lawsuit against George Stephanopoulos. It was atrocious. And it's gone on with what's going on at CBS, where you have folks in
Paramount.
the Trump administration who are making things very painful for that company, and it's caused friction between 60 Minutes, obviously, and the corporate parent. Um, and so I'm much more of one of those people now who thinks, damn, like, getting out of corporate media is much more important than I used to think. Independent media is much, much more important, because if you're going to have a government that's guiding philosophy is to weaponize the state against the American
Mm-hmm.
public, or at least its perceived enemies, you can't. It's not advantageous to work for a big company that is too entangled with the government.
Well, let's talk about some of the
Now,
things that you wrote. You're talking about, again, we know Politico as well as other outlets. You said their style of political coverage is not meeting the unprecedented moment of democratic peril we're facing. He said, I know that sounds, you wrote, but I know that sounds dramatic, but the gap between what is actually happening in Washington and how it is being framed and reported became much too wide. Now, your moment of shock was, as you pointed out, the Paul Weiss story, but what exactly, let's talk about how the media is covering Donald Trump, how they've navigated that first 100 days. So where have they fallen short? What should they be doing that you are not hearing them do?
yeah, and the first thing always to say when you're doing any media criticism is the media is,
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
It's a lot of different things, and so it is important to be specific. Um, for instance, I think the New York Times is doing some of the best work in the world. It's an absolutely essential news organization. I think it's a little scary that it actually doesn't have any robust competitors.
Yeah.
But anyway, just I know a lot of
Mm.
people bash the Times. I just want to. I'm not, I'm not one of those people. I try and be nuanced about what I think is working and isn't. But the I think there are a lot of reporters who got into this business because we love politics. We love the campaigns and polling and ads, and we love covering it as two roughly equal parties in competition with a set of
Right.
rules that are followed. And it's really, really uncomfortable when all of that changes and suddenly the government is basically the tip of a spear of an anti-democratic movement, and that that the overwhelming majority of what Americans need to worry about when it comes to politics and the government is about Trump and this political movement, right?
Yeah.
And that's hard for a lot of people to wrap their head around who came up like I did in journalism as you know uh, this style of journalism where you're always looking to both to both sides every issue.
Right.
And like, I can't
He
believe we're still
broke that
talking
model.
about. He broke
Yeah.
that model. He weaponized, the way I put it. I did an interview with a nice reporter over at the Columbia Journalism Review today, and the way I put it to him was like, he's weaponized our conventions against us, right?
Yes.
Our conventions of objectivity and the general and fairness. And we have to. I mean, the way I think about this, and look, it's not easy to to put this in a bullet point list of here's how you have to do it from
Yeah. Right.
going forward. But instead of being beholden to these conventions, which have served a purpose, will serve certain purposes going forward, you should be beholden to the ideals of the profession, not the conventions, but the ideals. And most of us got into journalism for idealistic reasons. And being forthright about the fact that journalism is American journalism, political journalism at its core is about ensuring that our democracy survives.
Right.
Um, and
So
people, a
what
lot
does
of people
that
in my
mean
business,
though? What so I mean, so
yeah,
I agree with everything you're saying, but specifically like day by day, as people are commenting and reporting
yeah,
on the Trump administration, are you saying there should be more screaming headlines like this is
no.
really bad? No, 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 this is really, really bad. You have no fucking idea how bad this is.
In some ways, I think that can backfire is the constant hair
Yeah.
on fire. The key, I think, is you have to make editorial judgments. Editors do that every day at every important
Mhm.
institution. You have to make judgments, and sometimes they're subjective judgments about framing, and you cannot treat everything as a poli- you know as pure politics. In other words,
As horse race necessarily.
right, because
Yeah.
everything gets horse racized, Charlie. Because so Donald Trump says, my goal, my political goal, what's going to cause, what's going to make me successful, is to, whatever crazy unconstitutional thing you want to
Yeah,
throw out
right,
there.
right.
If
Yeah.
suddenly he
Yeah.
sets that as a goal, the coverage can't be just judging whether he's like hit his metric or not.
Oh,
Like,
I
and
yeah.
that is there's so much of the coverage. I see these headlines sometimes where it's like, you know, uh, Donald Trump's next target is law firm whatever, um, and it's all sort of covered in this way, where you use his
It's
own.
pundit brain, right? I mean, it's pundit brain. It's like the Reichstag fire, a political plus or negative. How will this move the numbers? Actually, some pundit going on saying, the Reichstag fire will actually play to, the NDSP's political strengths or whatever. It's like, wait, 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 wait. No, we can't cover it that way. That's what you're saying,
Can't
right?
Yeah, you've got
Yeah,
pundits paid on CNN just to play that role, just
I
to
know.
sort of make that argument with everything, and it's crazy. And there's this sense that is somehow more fair and more helpful way of covering things, and that's that you so that's the problem as I see it. You have to, and look, it's not going to be easy to do this because sometimes these things are
No.
subjective and sometimes your own biases can come in, but you have to center the fact that you care about this democracy,
Yeah.
and being a journalist means being pro democracy, which is now that's considered partisan. It's considered partisan
Indeed,
language
yeah.
to think of yourself that way. And I just think we have to like wrap our head around that as reporters, and it's
So
going to be a little uncomfortable.
yeah, I mean, you wrote, and this struck me. You wrote, a friend of mine who served in Iraq once tried to explain to me how psychologically disorienting warfare can be for soldiers the first time they're in full scale combat. It's so horrific, so unlike any human experience, that the initial instinct is to deny that what's happening is actually happening. And that is the psychology that has seized many newsrooms, law firms, and other elite institutions in Washington for months. I mean, you do get that sense of complete discombobulation, complete disorientation. How do we deal with this? And the default setting is to go back and like, let's cover this like it's a normal presidency, a normal time, right? Because that's all we know.
The easier way to say it is just being in denial, because it's really uncomfortable, especially for a lot of reporters, to wrap their
Yeah.
heads around what is actually going on. I admit personally sort of wrestling with this, as I've watched the Trump administration unfold, and I didn't write about this, but I remember, in the early days, reading some very, learned scholars about who study democracy, and the names,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
and these people were using language that was so much more worrisome than
Yeah.
anything that was in the sort of mainstream political reporting. And I just
Well,
thought,
at a
like,
time it felt over the
that
top, right?
gap.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it did, but
Mhm.
I thought our coverage is not reflecting, what like some of the people who actually study this stuff, and the gap was like really, really wide.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying everything that Timothy Snyder said
Hmm.
is gospel, but
It's age glow.
we should be taking that stuff very, very seriously. And for me, it was thinking through that and being more interested in um, that debate and how you could cover what's going on through a little bit more through that prism, rather than a kind of brain dead horse race journalism. And
No.
it's not to say that other stuff doesn't exist, isn't out there. You will find plenty of examples and plenty of articles and
Yeah.
conversations about some of the stuff that I'm saying is generally missing, right?
Hmm.
It's not absent, but um, it needs to be more at the forefront
So,
of coverage.
well, you tell a story that I actually found genuinely shocking before the election. That you had a podcast at Politico, and that you recorded a podcast with one of the most important voices. I think somebody who really gets this, my friend Jonathan Rauch, who described what the danger of a Trump administration would be like, and that podcast never ran. And you published it, you downloaded it in your new publication, Telos News. And obviously that also touched a nerve for the folks in Politico. As you got another letter, right? You got another threat because you posted that. So tell me, first of all, what happened with that podcast? How can a voice like Jonathan Rauch talking to Politico before the presidential election not be deemed worthy of running?
It's a really interesting question, and I don't think there's a smoking gun here. Partly it's partly it's my own fault
Yeah.
for not pushing. But to me, when I think about, like, why didn't this ever run?
Yeah.
I think the sense at a place like Politico is just that it's considered partisan. It's this whole hour-long conversation
Yeah.
about, basically by someone laying out in detail how Trump's anti-democratic agenda is likely to unfold.
Yeah.
Um, and the more I thought about it, I understand. I understand. The question I was trying to wrestle with in resurfacing that interview is, why is it when we cover politics that this doesn't like fit in? Like, why doesn't this
Yeah.
fit into the political conversation?
Well, that
And
feels
I
like a
don't have a good
smoking
answer.
gun to me. No, that
Yeah, I
feels
don't have
that
a.
feels like, as an illustration of what you're talking about. Here you have a powerful, respected voice raising exactly the issues that you were describing, framing it exactly the way that we needed to frame it, and yet somehow it didn't fit into the model of what they were doing at Politico. This seems to sort of encapsulate your whole critique, right? Is that we're covering it as a
It,
horse race, and then there are these voices out there saying no, it is about this, and somehow that didn't fit the model.
it's a mindset rather than a
Yeah.
we're suppressing this to help Donald Trump. It's more just a general kind of vibe. You know what I mean, Charlie? And I think that we spend so much time, and I don't disagree with this criticism, but we spend so much time wrestling with why Biden's health issues, his mental acuity. I don't think it's just
Yeah.
age, but what we saw in this,
Mhm.
what we saw in the debate, basically, you know, why wasn't that covered more? Why didn't people really get to the
Mhm.
bottom of that? I think that's a legitimate criticism for a lot of
Very
newsrooms.
legitimate. Yeah.
Uh, but we don't spend as much time talking about why what's going on right now, which was laid out in quite a bit of detail. There's no secret about what Trump didn't hide this. Why don't we spend as much time on that issue and wrestling with it on a daily basis?
Excellent point. Now, I'm going to confess a certain amount of naivete because I have just so much bandwidth of all the things to pay attention to. Actually, I just went to a used bookstore and bought a book of essays by Saul Bellow,
Mm.
which by the way is titled "There Is Simply Too Much to Think About." Um, that seems like, wow, yeah, there is too much to think about all the time. But one of the things that I didn't fully understand until your fight with Politico escalated, as you pointed out, Politico was run by, how do you pronounce his name? Matthias
Matthias
Döpfner,
Döpfner. Yeah,
yeah,
Matthias
a
Döpfner.
conservative German billionaire and the CEO of Axel Springer. And I guess I knew these names, but this is a Berlin-based media empire, and this is going back to the whole thing that, okay, Politico's a very respected player, but now it's part of a international corporate conglomerate, and you have one more billionaire who's got his own personal agenda here, and you've called him out on that.
Yeah,
Tell me
look, I
about him.
think I, I don't know Matthias very well. I
Yeah.
sat with him at the White House Correspondents' Dinner
Mhm.
last year. He was, at my table. It's under quite a bit of
Yeah.
pressure to make sure we had some good guests that could
Yeah.
entertain him. Um, and look, I have told people that I never saw evidence when I was at Politico. We would always just refer to them as the Germans.
Yeah.
Once the Germans took over, I didn't. I never saw evidence of any
Right.
ideological meddling, but it's something that
Yeah.
all of us were on guard about. Because in Germany, Matthias is very, his tabloid is very well known for being, politically involved and pushing things this way or that way. He's known in Germany as the Rupert Murdoch of Germany. He's a very powerful and influential figure in German politics. So naturally, if you work for someone like that, you wonder, is he going to export that model to the United States?
Yeah.
And I think if you want to look for some worrying signs, you can point to some comments. A comment he made recently, talking about forgetting the word he used,
Hmm.
but saying something very positive
Inspiring.
about
Yeah.
inspiring about
Yeah.
JD Vance's speech that I did not find inspiring. Um, and that was after. I'll tell you why that stung a little bit for people who work there, is because that was after the Trump administration had really gone after Politico and its reporters. Trump called it a left
Left wing
wing
rag.
rag.
Mm.
He made up this ridiculous conspiracy thing about Politico being funded by USAID because a lot of government agencies pay for
Yeah.
Politico subscriptions. And so people there were feeling really under attack. And I think in those moments, you're really looking for editorial leadership, corporate ownership. to make sure they have your back. And my view of what you want in those moments is not a hint of giving in to the administration,
Right.
because they smell weakness and they will take another mile and they will come right back at you. So
Exactly.
in those
Mhm.
moments, even if it makes you seem a little, too hot or too partisan, you got to punch right back. And I was looking for those signs, and I didn't. I'll be very honest. I didn't see them, and I was very disappointed. I thought it was very regrettable that Politico sent one of our great reporters, Dasha Burns, to
Mhm.
CPAC to do an onstage interview. And you, my view of CPAC is that it has become just a sewer of media bashing and right wing conspiracies, and
Yeah.
it's very important and fine to cover CPAC, but I don't think you want your brand as a news organization to be associated with it in that way, to put someone on stage in a sort of kind of in more endorsement like thing. And I remember last year we had a reporter who was invited to CPAC in 2024, and they were told no, don't we don't we don't do
Yeah.
that. And so I thought it was a bad look to make that change, and especially after there was this fisticuffs with the Trump administration.
You've mentioned that there are folks who are still at Politico, your former colleagues who are at least quietly, reaching out to you that are embarrassed by the fact that Politico is actually trying to censor you and to bully you. And by the way, I think that that's exactly what they're trying to do. So give me a sense of, I think we're seeing this in all of these institutions in these newsrooms where there are people who are trying to do their jobs, trying to, maintain some sort of, their own integrity. But so what has the reaction been inside Politico to this rather escalating fight between you and those guys?
Yeah, I mean, I tell you, obviously, I talk to my colleagues over there all the time,
Yeah.
and they've been very glued to this thing because it's so unusual. I saw a lot of those folks this weekend at various events in Washington, and where the rubber meets the road is that a lot of my colleagues are paid subscribers now to Tell Us News, which I think is
Yeah.
sort of the ultimate endorsement, but I don't want to characterize every, single person. Obviously, there's some mixed views, but there is a general sense that a news organization should not be asking a journalist to remove entire 1,800 word articles over incidental criticism, even if they believe it's that they have a legitimate legal reason about a line or two. It's just crazy to ask for the whole scale deletion of an article, and then in the ensuing debate, additional requests for the deletion of additional articles, and that the whole thing is just in general a bad look.
Well, and you wrote that you were giving political. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me go back to this. The the letters from the lawyers have become increasingly aggressive, and they're saying you've given Politico no choice but to sue you. You have mentioned in your articles, though, you're on your own, right? You have no say. You're working without a net
Yeah,
right now. Big
this is it.
organization owned by a billionaire that decides to sue you, take you to court. I mean, aren't
Yeah,
you
they would
concerned
destroy us. Yeah,
they will vaporize you,
yeah,
right?
they would.
I
They
mean,
could.
how big is the threat? I mean, how dangerous is the threat? They could
Look, if they
destroy you,
wanted to
right?
spend, if they wanted to spend money, I mean, just
Yeah.
it's funny you say this, Charlie, because
Yeah.
ironically, tomorrow I have a very long piece coming out
Mm.
about a 6 year battle I had with Devin Nunes, who sued me for defamation. And
I remember that.
yeah, and so
Hmm.
that case only wrapped up. Believe it or not, that the end of that case officially is today. and I'll explain why in
Mhm.
this piece tomorrow,
Mhm.
and it's why I've waited until tomorrow to run this. But I know what it's like to go through litigation by someone who's got a lot of money and can make your life miserable. It's not fun. You could do a lot of damage. You can force people to spend a lot of money. You can tie them up with all sorts of frivolous requests if you
Mhm.
really want to do it.
Mhm.
So I I take the threat pretty seriously, but my alternative was to absolutely eviscerate my own journalistic integrity
Yeah.
on the first day of launching this new venture,
Mhm.
which that obviously would have been insane. So I'm not going to delete articles. I just think it's so anti-democratic, anti-free speech, and the way they went about it without any kind of conversation, without any kind of it's just these conclusory arguments. We demand you take this down right away. Um, that's nuts, and no self-respecting journalist would do that. So they they wrote me on Friday saying I leave them with no choice but to pursue litigation. They left me with no choice. And so, we'll see where it ends up. I'm not going to be bullied by this. I'm not going to take this material down. And if they think that the best thing to do is to sue me and enter into litigation, then I'm prepared to defend myself vigorously and successfully.
Good for you. Okay, so let's switch gears to what you do best, and what you got into this profession to do, which is to do a little bit of news analysis. It's the 100-day mark. What are your major takeaways? I'm sort of overwhelmed with trying to categorize all the different things that have happened. I would say this, however, that anyone who was really shocked by what Trump has tried to do was not paying attention last year, because he was very clear what he was going to do, and we were warned over and over and over again. But I'm willing to say the speed and the scope and the determination has really been remarkable. I think for me the biggest surprise was the lack, going back to what we've been discussing, has been the lack of real resistance, the number of institutions that rolled over to him. That surprised me.
Yes.
What Trump did was predictable. The collapse of much of the opposition, or the people, the institutions, the guardrails, whatever you want to say, that you counted on, that was a little breathtaking. That was a lot breathtaking.
Unbelievable. I think still hard to wrap my head around what media organizations did. We already mentioned ABC,
Mm-hmm.
what the universities like
Mm-hmm.
Columbia did,
Mm-hmm.
and what some of these law firms, which I don't know, I guess I don't know as much about big law firms as I thought I did. But at the end of the day, if you had asked me, and I've been involved in enough
Yeah.
litigation to know some of the some great lawyers
Mm-hmm.
who um, and I just can't believe that, officers of the court
I
would
was
roll
shocked.
over
Yeah.
so easily. I just, it made me realize
You
I just
you
don't
you you and
understand that
you
culture.
you and I had the same reaction to all of that. I felt like, am I just a little stuck on this? I cannot believe these gigantic law firms, these billion-dollar law firms, cutting these deals where they're basically putting themselves into receivership to Donald Trump. I mean, the humiliation of it, the bad judgment. But it was this sense that resistance is futile, and that's one of the themes of the first 100 days, right? That so many institutions decided he was unstoppable, that there was just too much power, and that he would destroy you if you did
Yeah.
not bend the knee.
And it's scary to be on the other side of those things. I mean, just to go back to this piece that's coming out tomorrow, that's
Yeah.
what this piece is about is, you know, when Devin Nunes sued me, he was, chairman of the intelligence committee, and the
Mm-hmm.
litigation went on for years.
Yeah.
Eventually he became CEO of the parent company of Truth Social, but all sorts of key political actors in the
Yeah.
MAGA movement eventually became part of this litigation. And so it gave me just a little bit of a sense of what it's like to be
Yeah.
targeted. Like when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about the weaponization of government, it gave me a close up view of that. So as I've watched this unfold in the last 100 days, I sort of thought about this 6-year process, and I thought, you know what,
Hmm.
that's what I saw this. I saw them testing this out, you know, in the last 6 or 7 years, when folks like Nunes and a lawyer he used named Stephen Biss launched a well-funded campaign against the media to use the courts, and if they could get to it, the discovery process, to target reporters and journalistic institutions around the country. And it
And
sort of
they
made me
don't need
realize, like,
to win, right? I mean, they don't need to win the
hundred
case to
percent.
drain you, right? I mean,
I
the
was just
process
writing.
is the punishment.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%, Charlie. Absolutely, because these guys didn't win anything, and all their cases got thrown
Right.
out. At least the ones I'm talking about with Nunes and Biss, I'm not aware of a single one of them that actually made it to trial. There's one that's still going on with MSNBC, that's
Hmm.
in later stages. We'll see where that ends up. But you're absolutely right. I had to sit for 2 8-hour depositions. I spent tons of time, handing over very sensitive personal things. I
Hmm.
had to fight. I had to go to court to make sure that Devin Nunes didn't get my tax returns. Um,
Oh,
we got his
okay.
though. I
Okay.
didn't personally get them, but the lawyers did. And it's just a draining process. And you know what it does, Charlie, as a journalist, and it made it uncomfortable at Politico,
Yeah.
because I remember, I was on CNN one time, and Devin Nunes came up, and I remember the host stopping at a certain point and saying, just in the spirit of full disclosure, you're being
Yeah.
sued by Devin Nunes right now.
Yeah.
And that's true. And that's the point. The point is, you go after the people who are covering you aggressively, and you create a conflict. You create a conflict of interest that didn't exist before. So if they write something you don't like in the future, you can say, "Oh, well, they're doing that because we're in litigation." Uh, and that's part of it. So it's your time. It's to tarnish your reputation. With Nunes, he, because you can say pretty much anything you want in a court filing. You can't, there's the
Right.
privilege, the speech privilege
Yeah.
in court filings is almost absolute. You can say some really
Hmm.
crazy stuff that, if you said it on the courtroom steps, you could easily be sued for defamation. But if you put it
Right.
in a court filing, it's privileged, it's protected. And so they do that. And then, as we as reporters, we're protected when we write about stuff that's in court filings. So they weaponize the discovery process and that privilege process to smear all sorts of journalists. So that was my experience, and I'm going to write about that tomorrow. Sorry to jump the gun. And
No, I'm
I
interested.
realized that this is the most important characteristic of the first 100 days, is
Yes.
taking over the state and using it against people Trump thinks are critics. Like, that is the story. And everything else is really interesting, but to me, that is the core philosophy here. And that's why I started Tellus. Like, that's the subject that we want to cover as aggressively as possible.
No, and I mean, and also when you're talking about litigation, just the incredible cost, the amount of money. But what we're seeing now, I think, is the leverage of government power and private attacks. So it can be a two-front war. I think the worst is yet to
Yes.
come. So, for example, with Paramount, or these lawsuits, you have a private lawsuit from Donald Trump for billions of dollars for some bullshit thing, but then you also have the FCC threatening. So you have government threats as well as this private. And again, people go, I don't want to put up with all this. One of the failures, I think, of
Really good point.
deal dealing with the Trump phenomenon, the Trump wave, the Trump regime, has been the failure of imagination. Um, Not
Hmm.
imagining what could they do, how bad could it get, what levers of power will they use. And you think about it, you want to talk about, journalists being nerds. I'm gonna nerd out on you just a little bit, because last night, just to take a break from politics, I went back and watched the first season of Andor, about the
I
the
never saw.
Empire and the Republic. Okay.
Is this
And
was that a Star Wars spinoff?
Yes, it's very, very well
Okay.
done. But they're tight.
Yeah.
If you want to sort of see a fascist regime, and the building of a resistance. But the thing that struck me was the ways in two things. Number one, the way they manipulate public opinion through propaganda, but also the technology they had for monitoring, monitoring potential opposition. Believe it, now we're done with Andor.
No,
What I think
but
we
now
sometimes have a
I
feel
want to know how they did it.
well, the failure of imagination is that whatever they did is nothing compared to what we the capacity of government versus and private entities to monitor um, private citizens. When you see uh,
Yeah.
confidential data from the IRS possibly being breached, when you see if those seals are broken, what could possibly in terms of our most dystopian sense of what can the government know about you. You said you successfully were able to keep Devin Nunes from getting your tax returns, but you could imagine a private public oligarchy that would have access to so much more than just your tax returns right now. I mean, the world that exists in this that I'm holding up my phone is beyond belief. So part of this resistance against the private public attacks on freedom and independence is we need to realize how bad it could actually get in the hands of people who have no principles, no ethics, and no limits. Now there's
I
my
mean,
paranoid moment for the
look,
day.
you're preaching to the choir. This is something I've thought about because I spent 6 years with Devin Nunes in litigation.
Mhm.
The um, level of intellectual honesty in a lot of the filings that I saw was not high. And his best friend is now the director of the FBI.
Yeah,
So, that's something that I've definitely taken note of. Um, and it's what not to go back to the Politico thing because I'm sick of talking
yeah,
about it, but it's
yeah.
also what frustrates me a little bit that they've sucked me in, that they've sucked me into that because I think journalists in general are feeling a little vulnerable.
Right.
And we've got enough stuff to worry about without like, a former employer, news organization, uh, you know, messing with you and making things more difficult.
At
Um,
this moment, with all the threats that are out there, with all of the issues, everything at stake, that they would choose. I know, I agree with you, but you've raised a number of issues. I mean, it's like with Cash Patel, as and talking about the first 100 days. You even 200 days ago, if you and I would have gone through a list of the Trump cabinet members, you would have thought it was a joke or it was a parody. It's like, okay, I'll raise you. Cash Patel is going to be the FBI director, and you might say, no, 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 Tulsi Gabbard's going to be the. Aha, okay, who can come up with more absurd? And yet here we are. So if an FBI agent comes to my door, do I talk to them? Do I cooperate with them? Do I give the government the benefit of the doubt that I might have years ago? I don't know. Who can you trust?
well, I can
What
answer that
will
question for you, Charlie. If an FBI
okay?
agent comes to your door,
No.
you very politely tell him the name of your lawyer and that they
Right.
can start there.
Well, exactly, and this would be true of virtually every single agency. So we're having
Yeah,
to confront questions that we've never had to confront before. I wrote my
yeah.
Substack newsletter today on the question: well, what would you do if ICE agents come to your place of business? I mean, here in Milwaukee, we had a sitting judge arrested in the courthouse because she wouldn't cooperate necessarily, do what the ICE agents wanted. Well, if you're a doctor, if you're a teacher, if you're a principal, if you're an academic, you might have to confront that. Somebody coming to you and saying, what moral political choice are you going to make now? Are you going to turn that migrant over? Are you going to cooperate with us? You're going to turn that migrant over because if you don't do what we tell you to do, there's a potential that we're going to arrest you and charge you with felonies. And I cannot remember a
100%
time in
right.
my life where so many Americans, including, I'm going to put myself in this list, is actually fearful of their government, that the government can do something to me because of something I think or say or do that is not strictly illegal. But, again, this is the failure of imagination in the past. And so going back to your coverage,
Yeah.
if you cover this as if it's just sort of like, hey, let's cover this presidency the way we covered the second term of the Clinton presidency, you're kind of missing the story here, right? You're missing the
That
line here.
That's it. That's where the warfare analogy comes in. What you just described, that
Mm,
kind of fear that um, you know, people could be afraid of that, and it could be totally misplaced because nothing like
you're
that's
right,
going
right.
on. But the
Yeah,
fact that we're having conversations like that and the fear is very well founded based on what we witnessed the last 100 days, that's where, like, when you have to snap out of the denial and be like, oh shit, you know I'm actually in combat here. Like, it's this is
yeah.
real.
You're
And
actually on a plane to El Salvador.
yeah, and like that's I think it's really hard to it is, just take a step back from the media bashing. It is hard to constantly and regularly um explain to people what the stakes are, especially
Right.
to normal people who just don't either really like Donald Trump and don't think that they'll have anything to worry about here,
Yeah.
or think everything he's doing is just fine. Explaining the stakes is difficult,
Very hard.
and
Well,
if and this is why I think Trump's big mistake is probably his biggest mistake is what he did with tariffs and how he just tanked his approval rating, by tanking, by possibly tanking the economy, but at least meddling with it in a way that a lot of people said, wait a second, this is not what I signed up for. Because as you know, Charlie, better than most people out there, you know, if you want to be like a 2025 authoritarian, there's a playbook, right? And
yeah,
you keep the public on your side by making sure the economy is humming along, right? You very hard to turn things into North Korea in most countries these
right.
days, right? But if you want to do the Orban model, if you want to do the Putin model, you make sure that it doesn't cost people economically, right? You can get away with all kinds of shit if you make people's lives a little bit better than the democratic, the fully democratic
As long
predecessor.
as the 401ks were fat and happy, he could have gotten away with a lot. But it's interesting that when the 401k starts shrinking, people become interested in a lot of other issues. I have to say that the most surprising number that I've seen, and I think it was from the New York Times Siena poll, was that his ranking, not only is he underwater on immigration, which is his key issue, but also his handling of the story of the Maryland man, Abrego Garcia, who was
Yeah,
rendition to
people
El
get it.
Salvador. Well, because all the smart people were telling us, all the horse race pundits were telling us that no, don't talk about this because this is Donald Trump's strength. The public actually likes it. It turns
Yeah,
out that defying the Supreme Court is not popular. People get it.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I probably would have bought that political argument that you're
Mhm.
criticizing there, and I do wonder how much it changes the view of a politician, or the view of Trump, to take the specific case here, when the economic, when the tariff, just meltdown was suddenly front and center for everyone, and does that start to bleed into all the other issues? And do people start to think like, huh, wait a second, maybe I should start listening to these annoying people who are always criticizing Donald Trump
Exactly.
about this other stuff? Maybe there's something there. I know it's hard to untangle those things, but it's a little bit like the Afghanistan moment in Biden's first year.
Yes.
Frankly, was always very surprised at how clear the data was, that was like a
Very
that
clear.
was like a hurricane for him, that
Mhm.
arguably he didn't really recover from,
I
and
agree.
fundamentally changed the way a lot of sort of voters who don't pay that much attention to politics but liked Biden over Trump because of the chaos of that first Trump term.
Yeah.
And you know that maybe that's what we're seeing here, and it is bleeding into
I wonder.
those other issues, and people, critics of Trump, are getting a fairer hearing on some of this other stuff. Or, Charlie, maybe it's
Yeah.
just that, like, the American people don't like, sending people to gulags.
Well, this is actually an interesting point because there are a lot of the people who have these, the pundit playbook, who see everything that Trump does as part of this four-dimensional chess that he's distracting. So, and you watch the
Yeah,
guy long enough, you kind of understand why he does certain things that he does, and clearly he was trying to distract from one story or another. You had the gulags, maybe he was using the gulag story to distract from the economy, but as you're pointing out, maybe it's not working that way. Maybe they are bleeding into one another. That the playbook that used to be, we're going to get you to talk about A as opposed to B, isn't quite working. Now people are going, well, yeah, maybe we ought to rethink all that because that doesn't make any sense to me. And suddenly, see, this is one of the differences of Trump 2.0, as you know, is the Trump 1.0, until you got the COVID epidemic, it didn't really affect people's lives or people at home. It
Yeah.
was stuff that was happening. Right now, everything they're doing is affecting every community, every state. There's the list of institutions. People are seeing the stories, the human cost, much more dramatically than in Trump 1.0. And amazingly, for those of us who've watched this, it does seem to be hurting Trump's numbers.
Yeah.
Something does matter.
Yeah, he's not, he's not Superman. And you're right, because
Right.
there's been so much work in the, you know, I've been meaning to write about this, and we're so Trump focused, and we're so focused on this as it's all Trump, it's all Trump.
Yeah.
A lot of the worst shit that's going on right now in the last 100 days comes right out of the fevered imaginations of some of the most MAGA Republicans, especially in the House. And
Yeah.
as you know, there's been an entire movement that has tried to, put the meat on the bone of this instinctual Trumpism that came along in 2015 and
Yeah.
2016.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of hard work, at Heritage and other places. The attacks on the universities. I mean, House Republicans, they when they had a lot of fun going after Columbia, wrapped everything in an
They were
effort to
effective.
fight
Yeah.
anti-Semitism, and they laid out this plan to go after the universities, right? So this is a Republican Party now that is sort of adopted the sort of weaponization of the government as a model. So it's not just it's not just Trump anymore
Right.
by any means.
Yeah, I mean, Russ Vogt, unlike Elon Musk, does seem to know what he's doing. I mean, he seems to have had a plan and he's executing it. And by the way, we haven't heard much from Elon lately, have we?
He's
Did
been
I
very
miss something?
quiet.
He has
He's
been
been
very
very
quiet
quiet as
ever
a
since the Wisconsin election.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, and it's the funny thing about Elon is if you are, I own a Tesla, and I used to be one of these
Yeah.
Tesla fanboys
Oh, really?
back in the day,
Yeah.
and I realized that Elon was an absolute fraud years ago, just from being
Hmm.
watching Tesla up. If you watched Elon over the years as the running Tesla, you would realize what a complete bullshit artist the guy was,
Yeah.
and the way that he promised this and that, and his cars would be flying across the country in 6 more
Yeah.
months if you just paid this amount. And
Yeah.
anyway, so that I think those of us who were conned by a lot of his Tesla marketing saw a long time ago that this guy was not to be trusted.
Yeah, but the bullshit finally caught up with him, didn't it? I guess, or at least politically. So that bromance appears to be done. I mean, 100 days, is that it? Are we done with
I
are we
mean,
done
I
with
feel like
Elon
that's
Musk?
yeah. I feel like that's one that everyone predicted because no relation.
Yeah.
That's we know enough about Trump to know that a relationship like that
Yeah.
cannot survive. And I feel like everyone who confidently predicted that is feeling okay. But I don't know, Charlie.
Yeah.
He might just have gone quiet. Uh,
Yeah.
so I'm not so sure.
Well, when you're the world's richest man, you can take a break and come back. But he's busy with the 40 kids or whatever he's got. I mean, it's inseminating the whole planet so that you can repopulate Mars is like time consuming. I mean, that's like, come on,
But
cut the guy,
first you got to make sure that
cut
the
him some
federal
slack.
government can in no way help that has no resources to help that mission in any way. That's the one thing that just I don't really get Elon's ideological commitment to just torching everything. I still I don't quite understand that. I mean, but go the thing that I found when I really put my tinfoil hat on in these first 100 days, the thing that I have found really, really interesting and tried to sort of understand is something you alluded to before in terms of government data and surveillance. Because the Doge effort was so laser focused on government data.
Yes.
There was a point where they made the CIO of every government agent, the chief information officer, a traditionally bureaucratic professional. They turned that into a position that was political appointees because Elon was having so much trouble, getting access to these systems. And if you read some of the interesting academics on this who were really, really worried when he started going department by department, agency to agency, really, really trying to get access to the data, that the logical conclusion of that could be something really, really scary. Right, like
very.
We built. This is where the libertarians have a really good
they had a
point of saying, "Told you so." You might, you never know who's going to be in power and what they're going to do with all that stuff. And so that to me is still one of the more undercovered stories of.
I agree.
Was this just a wrecking ball approach, or was there a more thought out? Plan here when it comes to consolidating access to data,
and we may not know the fallout from that for years. I mean, the reality is everything. Yeah,
and sometimes I think you sound crazy talking about this stuff. Right?
I know.
And I had someone I was a driver the other day. We were having a conversation, and I hate to be the cliched, annoying Washington person who's citing a taxi driver or an Uber driver, but really, it was just such a telling example because a very reasonable guy who said something like, "Well, I think the tanking of the economy is part of the whole thing because he wants to declare martial law after that," and. You have really crazy conversations like that these days, and it I think there was a point where I would have quietly gotten out of the cab, and politely told this guy have a great day, and it's not my reaction anymore, and that that's the place we're in right now.
Well, you're thinking, well, no, I'm sorry, that's a bit crazy. Or is it? You just don't. Ryan Lizza, thank you so much. Ryan Lizza is former chief Washington correspondent for Politico, but now is the CEO, whatever of Telos News, which you can find on Substack. Thanks so much for joining me today. Appreciate it very much.
It's a pleasure, Charlie. Really, really great conversation. Thank you.
And thank you all for joining me on this episode of To the Contrary. You know why we do this? Because more than ever, we need to remind ourselves that we are